Welcome to Nordic Fairy Tales. If you enjoy dark stories and folklore, please click subscribe. It really means a lot to us. And if you have a suggestion for our next tale, we'd love to hear it in the comments. Now, shall we start? The Draugen, a Nordic fairy tale. Chapter 1. The Return. The first gull found Eric before the shore did. It drifted beside his skiff like a ghost with a broken wing, riding the winter swell as if it knew his name. Beyond it the coast rose from the fog, a torn seam of rock, the dark line of spruces, a string of boathouses with doors warped by salt and years. Home. The village had not changed its bones, only its breath. The tide made the same sucking sounds beneath the wharf, the same tar-stained ropes sang against iron rings. But the air tasted different, metallic, as if the sea had bled. Eric shipped the oars, caught the piling, and tied off with hands that still remembered the Lofoten winter. Blue-knuckled, strong, and chafed raw where the nets had eaten skin. He stood a moment and listened. No laughter from the boathouses, no hammer from the smithy, no bells from the church on the rise, only the slow, wet breath of the fjord. He should have heard Rolf by now. His brother could smell a returning boat the way a cat smells milk. Rolf would come running, hat clapped to his head, grinning as if the world were something he'd just thought up. Eric stepped onto the dock and found the world he remembered missing its edges. A single woman stood at the far post, shawl tight around her shoulders, staring into the fog. The wind worried her grey hair into a fringe of seaweed. Everyone called her the Widow Arnoy, though Eric had never heard anyone say the husband's name. She did not look up when he approached. "God kveld," he said. She lifted a hand, not in greeting but to point, out, past the kelp line, where the water thickened into weather. "He is out," she said. "I smelled him last night." Eric tried to smile with his mouth and not his eyes. "Smelled who?" "You know." The gull settled on a post, cocked its head, and screamed. The sound rang off the boathouse doors and died with nothing to catch it. "Where's Rolf?" Eric asked, softer now. The widow lowered her hand. "He went to fetch the long line 3 mornings ago." "And?" "We found the buoys. We found the board with his name cut in it." Her jaw moved as if working a stubborn fishbone. "We did not find Rolf." Eric's throat closed. He tasted brine that wasn't from the wind. "The sea keeps what the sea loves," the widow said. "But he's not alone. 3 others these past fortnight." Eric looked past her, past the pier, past the rotten ladder leading down to the slip. The fog had thickened into a wall that seemed to pulse with its own tide. Somewhere inside it something knocked, once, twice, as if an oar struck water with no man to pull it. "Old voices carry on a flat sea," the widow whispered. "Last night I heard the long cry, the kind that hollows the ears." "A whale?" he said, "because a man must stand somewhere when the ground gives way." "No whale." The widow's eyes were as pale as fish belly. "He is hungry early this year." She finally looked at him, and in the looking some small mercy stirred. "You should find the priest," she said, "or the bell rope. Either will be wanted soon." Eric nodded because the body knows how to agree when the mind is drowning. He turned toward the path that climbed to the church. His boots rang on the planks and then fell silent on the hard ground. Behind him, the fjord breathed in, held the breath. And somewhere out in the grey, an oar knocked water a 3rd time, slow, deliberate, like the heartbeat of a thing that had learned to row without lungs. Chapter 2. The First Warning. The church stood with its back to the wind, timbers blackened by salt and sermon smoke. Eric found the priest where he expected him, in the vestry, with the door cracked and the air thick with the bitter tang of juniper. Father Halvorson was a small man made smaller by winter. His cassock hung on him like a sail on a windless day. He did not rise when Eric stepped in. "Rolf is gone," Eric said. The priest's eyes flicked once toward the far wall, where a coil of rope hung like a sleeping snake. "So I have been told." "The widow says it's—" Eric stopped. The word felt childish, like a charm muttered by boys on a dare. "She says it's him." Halvorson's fingers tightened on the edge of the table. "The sea keeps many ghosts, some louder than others." "You believe her?" "I believe the sea has ways of reminding us we are meat." Outside, a gull screamed, its cry cut short as if a hand had closed over it. "3 more are gone," Halvorson said quietly. "I have prayed for their rest, but I have not rung the bell." "Why not?" "Because the bell carries far, and some ears should not be called." Eric stared at him. "What are you saying?" Halvorson rose. He was not tall, but the candlelight made him loom. "I am saying there are warnings older than prayer, and older than me." He crossed to the wall, took down the rope, and pressed it into Eric's hands. "If you hear the long cry on a flat sea, ring until your arms fail. Do not stop, not for anything you see." "The widow said you'd know what to do," Halvorson nodded once. "And I say, stay ashore until the herring return. If you go out—" His gaze shifted to the shuttered window. "You'll meet him." Eric left with the rope under his arm. Outside, the light had gone iron grey. The tide sighed against the rocks. Then, out past the kelp beds, something knocked, once, twice, against the skin of the sea, and a long, hollow cry slid through the fog like a finger down his spine. Chapter 3. Blood in the Water. Dawn came like a bruise, purple and slow to fade. Eric was on the dock before the first stove smoke rose from the chimneys. The air was still, the tide halfway to slack. He could hear the creak of oarlocks from somewhere beyond the mist. 2 boys had gone out early, Leif and Mathis, brothers barely old enough to shave the down from their chins. Their skiff bobbed not far from the breakwater, lines dangling in the water. "Early start," Eric called, but the fog swallowed his words. He watched them haul in a net heavy with herring, silver bodies flashing in the dim light. They laughed, their voices thin in the damp air. Then, all at once, the laughter cut off. The surface of the fjord flattened, as if the wind had died in mid-breath. Even the gulls fell silent. A single swell rolled in from nowhere, lifting the boy's skiff like a toy and dropping it again. Mattis turned toward Eric, his mouth open in a shout he couldn't hear. Leif was looking down into the water as though something there had caught him. Eric took a step forward, one hand on the piling. The swell came again, harder. The skiff rocked dangerously. Then the water on the port side bulged black and glistening. A shape pressed up from beneath, long and pale and wrong. The boat tipped. Mathis grabbed for the gunwale. Leif was gone. Mathis screamed. Eric saw the whites of his eyes even through the fog. The boy kicked, thrashed, then vanished waist-deep as if yanked from below. He clawed at the air, gulped once, then slipped under entirely. Eric was already in a dinghy, rowing hard. By the time he reached the spot, the skiff was drifting empty, lines dragging in the water. The sea was calm again, as if nothing had happened. Something brushed the side of Eric's boat. A sodden rope trailing from the skiff. He pulled it in, hand over hand, until something heavy broke the surface, a net, tangled in weeds, and caught in the mesh, a fisherman's cap, leaves, still warm inside. The smell hit him then, rot, brine, and the iron stink of blood. The fog closed around him, and somewhere far off the oar knock began again. Chapter 4. The Disappearance. The search for Rolf began at first light the next morning. Men in wool caps and oilskin coats combed the shoreline, their boots crunching on frozen kelp. Small boats fanned out from the dock, their oars making hollow sounds on the water. Eric took the northern reach, following the fjord where it bent between two steep cliffs. Rolf's long line had been set far out, in deep water, where the current pulled hard. He found the buoys first, two red floats bobbing gently, a gull perched on one, tearing at something in the water. Eric rowed closer. The gull took wing, its beak trailing a thin red thread. The floats were still attached to the long line, but the line itself was slack, as though something had cut it. Eric hauled it in, hand over hand, and found the hook bent straight, the bait gone. He frowned and kept pulling. Then the smell came, thick, sweet, and wrong. Tangled in the line was a scrap of wood, splintered at one end. Carved into the surface in Rolf's careful hand was his name. Eric's stomach tightened. He scanned the water. A few meters away something floated just beneath the surface. A curved shape, pale against the green-black water. He dipped an oar to draw closer. The shape rolled, and for a heartbeat he saw what it was. A human arm, skin waxy and bloated, fingers splayed wide. Before he could reach it, the water churned. The arm vanished, yanked down so fast it left only a swirl of bubbles and a smear of dark weed in its place. The fjord went still again. No gulls, no wind. Then, from somewhere deep below, a single, slow knock. Eric backed the oars without realizing it, the boat drifting away from the spot. He pulled hard for the shore, not daring to look back, even when the smell followed him all the way to the dock. Chapter 5. The storm gathers. By the following evening the wind had shifted. It came now from the west, thick with the scent of rain and something fouler, like nets left too long in the sun. Most of the men in the village stayed ashore, mending gear or sitting in silence over mugs of coffee gone cold. But 3 young fishermen, Håkon, Birger and Jens, mocked the talk of Draugen. They were broad-shouldered, loud with drink, and eager to prove themselves braver than the old wives who warned them. "The sea is for those who take it," Håkon boomed, slapping his knee. "Ghosts don't row." Eric said nothing. He sat near the stove mending a tear in his oilskin, eyes on the rain-dark window. By late afternoon the 3 men had loaded their boat with lines and hooks and set out toward the fishing grounds. The first drops of rain fell as their sails vanished into the fog. By nightfall the wind had sharpened into knives. Eric stood on the dock with a few others, squinting into the dark. The waves beyond the breakwater rose and fell like black shoulders. Lightning stitched the clouds, throwing quick silver over the water. Then someone pointed. Out beyond the white caps a second vessel appeared. A long, narrow boat, its planks dark and rotted, riding the waves without rising or falling. It moved against the wind, cutting straight toward the younger men's craft. Another flash of lightning, and Eric saw the shape in the stern. A tall figure, hunched, with hair streaming like weed in the water, its hands hidden below the gunwale. The storm swallowed the sight, then spat it out again. The boats were side by side now, their hulls almost touching. A scream tore the air, high and thin, then cut short. The younger men's boat lurched, tilted, and the stern went under. A wave crashed and both vessels were gone. Only an empty coil of rope floated in the boiling sea. Eric felt the dock sway beneath his feet, though the piling stood firm. Somewhere out in the storm something knocked 3 times, slow and deliberate, each strike louder than the wind. Chapter 6. The Hunt. The storm did not fade with the dawn. Grey light bled into the sky, revealing a fjord churned to froth. Rain hissed against the rooftops, running in streams down the stone steps to the quay. Eric had not slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the empty skiff, Rolf's name carved into splintered wood, and the rotted boat gliding against the wind. By mid-morning he had made up his mind. He gathered a harpoon, a length of heavy rope, and his father's lantern, still smelling faintly of whale oil. Without a word to anyone, he untied his boat and pushed off into the teeth of the weather. The oars bit into the waves. Troughs opened and closed around him like black gates, each one carrying him deeper into the fog. Somewhere in that shifting wall, an oar knocked the water, slow, measured, not his own, once, twice. Then the shape appeared, a longboat, its planks soft with rot, the grain swollen and split. The bow cut the water without effort, and in the stern stood the figure. Taller than any man, it was draped in tattered sailcloth. Strips of seaweed hung from its arms, swaying like funeral ribbons. Its head was bare, pale scalp stretched tight over bone, hair matted with salt and slime. Where the eyes should have been, there were only dark holes, and from those holes seawater poured in thin, steady streams, the Draugen. Eric's grip on the harpoon tightened until his knuckles blanched. "Rolf!" he shouted into the wind, though the name tore at his throat. The figure did not answer. It only began to row, without bending its back, without shifting its weight, each stroke of the oar like the tolling of a distant bell. As the 2 boats closed, Eric saw more. Faces beneath the water, pale and drifting, hair waving like kelp. Rolf among them, his eyes closed, lips moving in some silent word. "Let him go!" Eric roared. The Draugen tilted its head, as if considering. Then it released the oar and reached across the gap between them. The hand was bone-white, long-fingered, nails black with rot. It closed on the gunwale of Eric's boat and began to pull. Chapter 7. The Dragging. The gunwale groaned under the weight of that grip. Salt water ran from the Draugen sleeves, pooling at Eric's feet. The stench was overpowering, rot, brine, and something older, like the breath of a deep cave. Eric drove the harpoon forward, aiming for the hollow where its eye should have been. The tip struck with a sound like splitting ice. Black water erupted from the wound, hissing as it hit the planks. The Draugen did not flinch. Instead, it pulled harder. The boat lurched and Eric pitched forward, his knees slamming against the thwart. The cold fingers clamped around his ankle. With a roar, he kicked free, scrambling for the lantern. Whale oil sloshed as he tore off the cap, the smell sharp in his nose. He hurled it at the figure. The oil caught on its tattered sailcloth, and for a heartbeat the Draugen burned, flames licking up its chest, light dancing on the black waves. Then the sea rose up and swallowed the fire whole. From beneath, pale hands pressed against the hull, 6, maybe more. The boat began to sink on one side, water spilling over the edge. Eric saw faces again, clearer now, mouths opening in unison as if to sing. The song was not for him. It was for the depths. His harpoon was gone. Rope snaked around his calves, pulled tight. He grabbed for the side, fingers scrabbling at the slick wood. "Rolf," he shouted. But this time it was not a call. It was a plea. The Draugen's empty gaze met his. Then it pulled. The cold hit him like stone. The world turned green-black, bubbles swarming past his face. He kicked, but the rope bit deeper. The pale faces surrounded him now, Håkon, Birger, Jens, the two boys and Rolf. His brother's lips moved again, forming the same word. Stay. The last thing Eric saw before the dark closed over him was the Draugen's arms sweeping through the water, herding them all down toward the silent floor of the fjord. Chapter 8. The Silence After. Morning broke clear, as if the storm had never been. The fjord lay flat and silver under a sky scraped clean of clouds. Only the gulls cried, and even they seemed cautious. Old Martin was the first to see it. A small fishing boat drifting toward the breakwater, half filled with water and tang. The oars were gone. He and two others rowed out to meet it. The hull was scratched deep, as if by stones or claws. In the bottom lay a coil of a rope, slick and black as eel skin. No body, no blood. Eric's boat, Martin said. The name sat in the air a moment, then dropped like a stone. They towed it in. By the time they reached the dock, the widow Arne was there, standing exactly where she had when Eric came home. She said nothing at first, only stepped forward, put her hand on the gunwale, and leaned in to sniff. "He's gone," she murmured, "and not alone." The men exchanged glances. "How do you know?" Martin asked. The widow's eyes were fixed on the horizon, where a faint haze still clung to the water. "Because I smelled him before you came in." For a long while no one moved. Then she turned and walked up the quay, her shawl snapping in the breeze. "He'll take one more next year," she called over her shoulder. "Always one more." By midday the boat was pulled onto the slip. Rain began again, soft and steady, blurring the line between sea and sky. Out on the fjord, far beyond the kelp beds, something knocked, once, twice, against the skin of the water. And then the silence returned. Thank you for listening to this episode of Nordic Fairy Tales. If you liked the video, would you please consider subscribing, as it helps us with making more. Thank you, and have a good night.